Let me focus my comments on the efforts to abolish private property concerning land. But first, what is private property? Well, private property includes your person. Your thoughts are your private property. And your relationship to some things are your private property. By relationship, I mean the power to use and enjoy that thing. It's the relationship that reflects the idea of private property. Private property can only exist where unalienable rights are recognized. The key is all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. America is the only place where, if only for a brief shining moment, unalienable rights have been politically recognized. Now they are being ignored. As America implements Agenda 21's two land use programs called Smart Growth and the Wildlands Network, recognition of unalienable rights is obliterated. Let me explain these programs with the help of this well-visited map. Let me define a couple of terms. First, wildlands. Wildlands means the removal of people and the prohibition of resource extraction. If you're in Montana, you can't mine. If you're in the Sierras or if you're in Montana, you can't cut down trees. The areas that are intended as wildland designations are covered in red. The wildland areas is to be void of people. The yellow areas are buffers to the wildlands where public-private partners will engage in limited and controlled activities. Amador County is a buffer to the Sierra Wildlands. Smart growth is the stacking and packing of human beings in dense cities where people will depend on public transportation rather than automobility. In the words of a smart growth advocate, it will be the people, and make this clear, a smart growth advocate said, quote, "It will be the people in cages with the animals roaming freely." Smart growth areas, also referred to by the UN as human settlements, are demonstrated by the black dots. Now, communities like this, you won't see any black dots along the Sierras. You know, it's in the Bay Area, Los Angeles area, East Coast, a couple of spots in the Midwest. But what the smart growth they're talking about here is to create the kind of management community for the buffer areas. Remember, all species are of equal value, so the purpose of people living here will be to facilitate the migration patterns of wild animals from the Sierras to the coast. That's why you see the red lines flowing through California. We'll see a closer map of California later on. This next web page is from Resource Roundup, which is a research tool for citizens. On this page, a map created by the Wildlands Network, formerly called the Wildlands Project, shows the thrust of the wildland set aside. The Wildlands Network states that it wants to rewild 50% of America, but in actuality it is not about rewilding, whatever that might mean, but about removing humans from the landscape. So this graphic is one of the many maps from the Wildland Project website that show the plan for the country. The wide arrowed areas show lands that the Wildlands Project once set aside for animals, especially reintroduced large predators. You can understand the problems they're having in Missouri and Colorado and Wyoming with wolves. But you can also see that there's a finger of this big Yukon to Yucatan wildland corridor stretching the length of the continent as it has a finger coming off to pick up the Sierras. Now I want to switch tune a little bit. and talk about the North American Union and the Trans-Texas Corridor. The Trans-Texas Corridor is a major component in the creation of a North American Union. The corridor facilitates the political equalization of Mexico, Canada, and the United States through the establishment of trade routes, toll roads, utility lines, and inland ports. These systems are to be developed, managed, and owned by various multinational corporations working in public-private partnership with governments. You can see the corridor begins in the central of Mexico, comes up through the Texas border, all the way through the United States and into Canada. It has branches coming off, including Highway 5 in California. Goods are offloaded from China here. They come in without duty or inspection, get offloaded by a Mexican council in Kansas City, while it then proceeds for distribution through the United States. You know, the goal under the Earth Charter is the equalization within and between nations. This is why American manufacturing has been decimated. This is why unemployment is high, and it's going to get worse. Because if Americans live beyond the status of Mexican peasants, we simply are not in harmony with the world. This is what our political parties are taking to. This isn't an offshore fight. This is a fight happening right here in the United States, and to date, we've been sold out by our leaders. Now, in order to meet the global equalization objectives of the economic E of sustainable development, it requires global management of trade directed by the World Trade Organization, pursuant to policy created by the World Bank. This system of managed trade necessitates bringing down American production and middle-class standards of living to a world standard, similar to the European Union. The North American Union calls for an eventual merger of countries, in this case Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. By design, this leads to regional governance that sacrifices our unalienable rights and our national sovereignty. I'm going to point to three circumstances for which the United States Constitution is totally responsible. These three circumstances are the underpinnings of blowing up the American constitutional system of government. The first constitutional breach undertaken by Congress is the federal ownership and/or management of broad landscapes. Implementation of the Wildlands network is a violation of Article 1, which deals with the legislative branch, Section 8, which deals with the legislative powers of the United States Constitution. Now, constitutional authority for federal land ownership is set out in Article 1, Section 8. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, talking about D.C., not exceeding 10 miles square, to become seat of the government of the United States and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislator of the state in which the same shall be. 4, here's the limiting condition. 4, the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Well, where's the mention of a need or authority for creating the Department of Interior or the Department of Agriculture, which then in part holds millions of acres across the U.S., including most of the Sierras? There is no mention of a need or authority for creating the Department of Interior or for the creating of massive wildland zonings anywhere in America. There is no authorization for the federal land ownership or contemporary wildland bills that have been processed by Congress. The Constitution was written to protect the unalienable rights of the people, not to abrogate them. So who is Congress working for? There's a war on the American ideals, and Congress is on the wrong side. Remember, Government powers are granted under the Constitution. They cannot just be taken by a narrow mob with political frontmen seeking power and control over resources, and yet that is exactly what is happening. Defaulting to federal authority in the area of land and resource management is a huge mistake. Government parks should be determined and owned by states and/or local governments. There is no federal authority for ownership and management of parks and the resources they hold. Now, a second congressional breach of constitutional responsibilities is the delegation of trade policy to international institutions. Congress has delegated authority over U.S. trade policy to the World Trade Organization and to various multilateral trade pact organizations. This necessarily comes at the expense of sovereignty. The effects of surrendering trade policy control include a disintegrating border. For example, the NAFTA agreement calls for a 200-kilometer wide international zone of cooperation straddling the southern border. There's no trade border there. It's an international zone of cooperation. Also, constitutional taxing authority under Article 1, Section 9 becomes neutered. The constitutionally intended form of taxation, known as indirect taxation, consists primarily of import and excise duties, which are lost to the World Trade Organization's so-called free trade requirements. It is not free trade that is being implemented. It is a managed global trade control that is being exercised over America. This policy is designed to economically equalize nations in accordance with the Earth Charter principle, to equalize wealth within and between nations. American industries are lost to this globalization process. Average American earner wages are reduced toward global norms. And multinational corporations profit from the cheap, often slave labor found overseas. A massive profit arrangement is protected by the World Bank from American duties. Domestic production is sacrificed. The American balance sheet is destroyed, and America sinks. Now, the designs of global managed free trade include multinational corporate control in partnership with various world government agencies, and that has happened. The redistribution of America's wealth, well, that's why we're the greatest creditor nation in the country. It is designed to neuter Americans' sovereignty. The modern trade regime results in manufacturing job losses, starting with a shuttling of resource extraction activity. The consequence has been production leaves the U.S., finished goods are then imported, often from slave labor countries, always concentrating wealth into the hands of global business partners of prospective world government while draining off American capital. Prince Charles established the Sustainable Business Council with major multinational businesses led by British Petroleum. You see, globalist corporate coordination has occurred. American trade policy must again become American-made. America cannot surrender its trade-making power and remain a sovereign nation. American involvement in the World Bank organization is designed to destroy the nation. The sustainable program is more than green.